All of my life, I heard about my great-uncle, Joseph Albert Williams, a resident of Gettysburg. Like many men at the time of World War I, he too wanted to serve his country and enlisted in the army to fight in France. After completing military training, he and the members of his unit deployed to France. He fought in the trenches from the Argonne Woods to the city of Verdun. He did what his country asked him to do, and during the final offensive of the war, he made the ultimate sacrifice. It wasn't enough to hear the stories. I needed to walk in his footsteps to see what he saw and understand what Joseph and his comrades experienced in France. Although this story is about Joseph, I would really like to dedicate it to all the men who fought in the war.
Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere, so prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware, we'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
When America entered into World War I, the call for men to enlist went out across the country, and Joseph would enlist. He and 6 other black men went to the recruiting station and was inducted on October 28, 1917. He and the others must have been thrilled to be part of a patriotic effort of their times. I can imagine when my great-grandfather saw him off to war and being proud of him and not knowing that this would be the last time he would see his son. As I envisioned the train station, I could see Joseph's father saying goodbye to his son and trying to grapple at the pride he had and absolute fear he must have had inside. When Joseph arrived at Camp Meade, he began the process of becoming a soldier with many other men. It must have seemed exciting to put his civilian clothes away and to get dressed in his army uniform. The men would practice how to march and drill every day. They would do physical fitness, go on long road marches with their backpacks, and qualify with their rifles shooting at targets. I had a chance to go to Fort Meade and walk the grounds of old Camp Meade, where Joseph trained with his fellow friends. The old train tracks were still there, and I could imagine Joseph arriving there with excitement and wonder in his eyes. I also walked the grounds where his barracks were located and could visualize him and the others marching from one place to another. After months of training, his unit boarded troop transport ships and began the voyage to France. Joseph departed on the USS Henry R. Mallory and left from Hoboken, New Jersey on the 23rd of April, 1918. I'm trying to visualize Joseph boarding the ship and believing he was on a great adventure. It must have seemed like a big ship to him, but out on the open ocean, it really wasn't that big. I can imagine that it was a frightening experience knowing that the German submarines were hunting U.S. ships. When the train got to the village of Vaucourt, the men got out of their railroad cars and began to form up into their units. It was a miserable night, and they were standing in the rain, waiting till everyone was accounted for. Then, through the night and heavy rain, they marched into a French training base in the village of Condé-Barrez. The 372nd found out that they had been detailed in the French army and would not be fighting with the other American units. Although it must have been a big disappointment to the men, I am sure they felt fortunate to still be a fighting unit representing America. I had a chance to walk the streets of Vaucourt and see the village that Joseph marched through. Although the beautiful church has been rebuilt, Joseph would have seen only a pile of rubble from German artillery attacks. The 372nd reached the French training base of Condé-Barrez at about 2 a.m. Soaking wet, they found dry quarters to rest in for the remainder of the night. In the morning, they were given French uniforms, equipment, and rifles. They were now members of the French 157 Infantry Division, and the French were grateful to have them. The division was known for their shoulder patch as the Red Hand Division, and the 372nd wasted no time in training the men for trench warfare. It must have been interesting for the Americans to train in this unit, since it was compiled of men from the French African colonies. On the 26th, the 372nd moves up to the front of the Argonne West sector. The unit travels to a rear base support area of the sector of the village of Les Sonatas. The men must have been relieved to be driven to this area by the French motor trucks and were spared the long foot march. Here Joseph and the other men received their detailed training in trench warfare from the men who had been defending the sector. By now, they were all close enough to the trenches to hear the sounds of battle. As they marched, they passed the Les Chalades, a beautiful Catholic abbey. I walked around the abbey and was thrilled to see that it was being maintained by an Italian caretaker who gave me a tour. Joseph was deeply religious and must have marveled at the sight. Later, we walked the line of trenches in the sector and could imagine the members of Joseph's unit fighting back the German probes and advances. I could really feel the presence of the men that fought here. 372nd changed sectors on the 20th of June and took over the Vaucourt sector. There, the regiment performed the same duties of trench warfare as they did in the Argonne West sector. Joseph and his unit prepared for gas attacks and probes from the Germans. Vaucourt's hill was one of the tallest hills around, and both sides wanted to dominate it. It was an overwhelming message to remember the soldiers from both sides. When I visited the hill, I could imagine Joseph looking off into the distance at the German positions across the no man's land. As I walked across the grounds, I came across an old mortar cannon and then saw the picture of a group of Germans standing behind it from 100 years ago. It was here that I had the sense that all who fought and died here wanted to be remembered and understood. Late in July, the 372nd was ordered to occupy Hill 304, a hotly contested hill, and was merciless to the men from either side. On one day, an Austrian artillery unit heavily shelled the hill and killed 2 Americans and 1 Frenchman assigned to the 372nd. also recorded in the regimental history and on film. Joseph and the others got to watch an airplane dogfight between a German and French pilot. Aircraft was new to warfare, and the men just watched in amazement as the war shifted from the ground to the skies. Joseph and the other men of the 372nd were relieved from Hill 304 on September 9th. They left the hill in pouring rain and sludged down the hill into the mud. From the time they left Hill 304, the unit was in constant preparation for something big. They went to a number of different locations and began preparing for the big offensive they had heard was coming. Their mission was to advance from Ripon to a place called Busey Farms that lay atop a steep incline. On September 28th, the 372nd waited for the whistle that would signal the men to go over the top of their trenches and began advancing towards the enemy. One account in a diary stated that over the top, September 28th, machine gun fire is thick and the 88s are falling like hail. During that murderous combination of death, Joseph A. Williams died in France. I visited the area of Ripon to walk the grounds where Joseph died and hoped he could feel my presence as I could feel his. Later that day, I went to Busey Farms, and a wonderful, kind farmer took me up a hill to see a war monument. Although the site was dedicated to the 371st Infantry, a sister unit of Joseph's regiment, I was pleased that we, as Americans, let those boys know that they aren't forgotten. It wasn't until later that we found the 372nd monument and paid tribute to those brave men as well. It was a beautiful day in May when we went to our final stop in the footsteps of Joseph. When I entered the Moose Argonne American Cemetery, my heart was filled with appreciation for the French, who take meticulous care of our World War I soldiers. I looked for his grave position on a diagram and then slowly walked to it. Near where I located it, there was a French field trip of young school children, and I was so glad to know that people come to visit our soldiers and know what they sacrifice. At the grave, I spoke with Joseph to let him know he will never be forgotten and never will be. I bought a picture of my great-grandfather and my grandmother and told him how honored I was to be here. When I returned home, I think of Joseph's name upon a plaque outside the courthouse that bears the names of all the men from Adams County that died in World War I, and would like them to know we will never forget them.